The story, which takes place during Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian reign, is a compelling story of the king's meeting with a person who looks like Jesus. Nebuchadnezzar's sensibilities are tested by this unsettling and supernatural encounter, which sets off a dramatic path of spiritual enlightenment and revelation. Prophecy, spirituality, and historical background are skillfully twisted into the narrative, illuminating religion and the mysterious links between heavenly meetings and earthly governance. Join us to explore the fascinating story between spiritual mystery and ancient history, Nebuchadnezzar's scary confrontation with Jesus. One of the most influential kings in history is King Nebuchadnezzar. He was the older of Nabopolassar's two sons and a distinctive figure who commanded authority and control. King Nebuchadnezzar was a fighter, the greatest military leader of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, in Louise Pryke's words. In addition to being a warrior, Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned from 605 to 562 BCE, tried to rebuild Babylon and establish religious devotion. He strengthened his position as king and solidified it during his rule. Among monarchs, Nebuchadnezzar is regarded highly for his military bravery. Nebuchadnezzar led his father's army as crown prince in the highlands north of Assyria. In addition, he took over as army commander from his father, defeating the Egyptian army and taking control of Syria. He contributed significantly to the liberation of Babylon. His military exploits demonstrated his enthusiasm for extending Babylonian control and conquering new lands at an early age, indicating his obvious potential. In August 605, Nebuchadnezzar assumed the throne upon his father's death. He then carried on establishing his rule and capturing more lands. Although Judah, Egypt, and Assyria were all conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, the Bible records his most well-known conquest, Jerusalem. Some call him the wicked and ruthless king who wiped out Jerusalem and banished the Jewish people. Nebuchadnezzar is said to have destroyed towns with such cruelty and high temperatures that the structures made of limestone turned to lime. Due to his conquests, Nebuchadnezzar became one of the most influential rulers in history, building his kingdom into an immense power. He rose to fame as a leader among his people and foreign nations. Cities that decided to be dependent states included Judah. This indicates that Nebuchadnezzar was their ruler's superior, and their kings served as his advisors and representatives. King Nebuchadnezzar had deep beliefs in religion according to the Bible. There are accounts of magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and fortune-tellers working for King Nebuchadnezzar in the Old Testament book of Daniel. Since King Nebuchadnezzar considered these individuals knowledgeable in the natural and supernatural arts, he sought their advice. He thought he might conquer with the aid of the gods. The king's magicians were eclipsed by one man, Daniel, an exile from the Hebrews. Daniel greatly influenced the theological views of King Nebuchadnezzar. According to the biblical account, Daniel's God finally rises as the most powerful deity, surpassing all other old deities. After ordering the magicians to inform him of what he had dreamed of and the meaning of his dream, Nebuchadnezzar eventually came to trust the God of Israel, also known as Daniel's God. They all failed to do so in the biblical account, but Daniel tells the king that only his God can complete this mission. Daniel describes and analyzes his dream for the king. During Nebuchadnezzar's rule over Israel, he recruited young noblemen to serve as attendants in his household for 3 years. 3 men named Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were among them, as was Daniel, who would eventually be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel became Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego, as part of Nebuchadnezzar's instruction to adapt them to Babylonian society. But Daniel had no desire to defile himself with the king's food or drink. The meal that the king ate may have been flesh that had been sacrificed to idols or meat from which the blood had not been properly drained, making it unacceptable for consumption by God's people. Daniel begged to be spared this food by the head chamberlain, with whom he was friendly. However, the chief chamberlain was hesitant to do so because he thought Daniel would appear ill and underweight compared to the other young men, which would result in punishment for the chamberlain. Ultimately, Daniel convinced him to let Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego attempt a 10-day fast of vegetables and water to see whether their appearance would improve. After 10 days, the head chamberlain agreed, and the 4 servants appeared even healthier than the other guys. When he realized this, he kept feeding them water and veggies rather than the king's recommended diet. God also endowed these young men with knowledge and proficiency in all literature and wisdom. The Lord sent Nebuchadnezzar dreadful visions in his 2nd year as king. Daniel was requested to tell him his dream and interpret it. After all, his wise men failed to do so and were put to death. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were requested to pray for God to disclose it to Daniel, who received it. Daniel 2:48-29 describes how the king was amazed by Daniel's insight. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel requested the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. However, further difficulties awaited them. King Nebuchadnezzar commissioned the construction of a massive gold statue, which he ordered everyone in the kingdom to worship. On the other hand, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to obey the decision, and the Chaldeans brought this to the king's notice. Nebuchadnezzar was enraged and had the 3 men brought before him right away, according to Daniel 3:14-18. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, fall and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to answer you. If so, the God we serve can deliver us from the burning, fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar was furious and ordered them to be thrown into the furnace immediately, commanding his men to heat it to 7 times its normal temperature. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were bound and tossed into the fire, they began praising and praying to God. The king's attendants continued to fan the flames, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were unscathed. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't believe his eyes when he saw 4 men strolling around in the flames. One looked like the Son of God. Jesus knew how to pick the right time, but when an issue was critically important, he didn't hesitate to address it. He entered into the discussion fully aware of the opposition he would face, just as he showed up to rescue Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and also how he came through for the man with withered hand in synagogue way in Mark 3:16. Again he entered the synagogue way, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego emerged from the furnace, it was clear that the fire had had no power over the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their heads had been singed, nor had their garments been altered. There was not even a smell of fire about them. Nebuchadnezzar, amazed by God's deliverance, thanked the Lord and elevated Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. "There is no other God who can rescue like this," Nebuchadnezzar stated, and all the people were to worship the Lord. However, King Nebuchadnezzar's biggest contact with the Israelite God is when he boasts of his enormous strength, comparing himself to a god. While on this, a voice from heaven notifies him that God has robbed him of his regal power. God switches from speaking to him through dreams to communicating with him through a voice from above. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. And you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will." Immediately, the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. What can we learn from the narrative of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? These 3 young men showed their entire faith in God's sovereignty and were unafraid to challenge the most powerful king in the nation. They were prepared to pay whatever price they had to pay for rejecting the king's edicts, knowing that God may or might not choose to save them. But God did, showing he would always rescue his people in times of need. If you learned anything from this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to spread awareness of God's love for us. Thank you, and God bless you.